Ako je vjerovati časopisu Time, naš večerašnji gost spada među 100 najutjecajnijih ljudi na svijetu. A ako je mjeriti prema broju akademskih citata, onda je 4. najutjecajniji svjetski ekonomist. Bio je glavni gospodarski savjetnik američkog predsjednika Clintona i glavni ekonomist Svjetske banke. Pa ipak, usprkos svih ovih zvučnih titula, zadnjih 20 godina najpoznatiji je upravo po kritici MMF-a, globalizacije, mjera štednje i naravno fundamentalista slobodnog tržišta. I zadnje, ali ne manje važno, 2001. godine dobio je nagradu Švedske narodne banke u spomen na Alfreda Nobela. Dakle, kolokvijalno ga zovu Nobelovac, premda Nobelova nagrada za ekonomiju zapravo ne postoji. Poštovane dame i gospodo, s nama je večeras profesor dr. Joseph Stiglitz. Mr. Stiglitz, welcome to Croatian Radio Television.
Nice to be here.
Do you believe that your criticism, usually addressed to Frankfurt, Brussels, or to Washington, can also apply to the small and open economies such as Croatia? Because we have a public debt that is 90% of GDP, we have a fiscal deficit of 5 to 6% a year, and we are 6 years in a row in a period of recession. What would you suggest? Which economic policy should such a country apply in order to escape from a 6 years of stagnation?
Well, Croatia is in a difficult position. The first policy would be to get the rest of Europe to grow. Because if the rest of Europe were growing, they'd come down to Croatia for beautiful vacations, they'd buy more Croatian goods, and that would do more than anything else to lift up the Croatian economy. But you're a small country and you're not going to persuade easily the rest of Europe to change their very flawed policies. So the second thing you have to do, I think, is probably address the debt problem, which means I suspect that you will have to think seriously about converting those debts that are denominated in Swiss francs, denominated in the euros, into local currency.
Who will pay the price of these conversions?
The banks.
The banks?
The banks.
Oh,
they
did not agree about that.
Well, 2 points. They made loans that were inappropriate. They were supposedly the financial experts. They were supposed to be advising ordinary Croatians, and they didn't do a good job. But moreover, the interest rates that they charge always had a risk premium. What is a risk premium? You get more than the safe rate of interest to compensate you for the risk. One of the risks is that people won't repay you.
This move will raise a country risk. Don't you think so?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe some effect of that kind, but you have to understand that if the country remains in recession, that also increases the country risk. The most important thing in my experience for getting the country risk down is getting growth up. So if you have a set of policies that start the economy growing, that will do more to lower the country risk than anything else.
Why is the public debt considered equal as a general government debt? Because in the European Union, public debt does not include outstanding financial liabilities of state-owned enterprises. So it's not the same.
What I say is one should not focus on the debt at all.
Oh, well,
what you should focus on is the overall liabilities and assets of the country. So, in my mind, if a government borrows money for education, for investments in people, for infrastructure, for roads, for airports, for ports, for technology, to make the citizens, to make the country more productive, that's creating an asset.
I was asking you this question because since the German reunification, the general government gross debt rose from 42 to 74% of GDP. This is one side of the story. But also, according to Eurostat data published last year, financial liabilities of state-owned enterprises reach 126% of GDP. If we put these two figures together, total gross public sector debt of Germany is more than 200% of GDP, one of the largest in Europe. Is that a problem, potential danger, or just a fact we should ignore?
Well, I think it's something you ought to look at, but I think you ought to look at it in terms of what I said. You look at the liabilities and you look at the assets. Mm-hmm. And what you should certainly say is Germany should not just be criticizing other countries for their debt GDP ratio. Mm-hmm. If you mix up the books, we used to call this creative accounting. The corporations learn how to do creative accounting. Governments learn how to do creative accounting. You put certain things in one category and you don't add them up, you get a different picture. So I agree with you very much. You ought to look at all these numbers.
But the Ireland is, for example, getting out of the recession usually.
Not really.
Not really. Well, figures looks like nice.
What it says is it's not going down anymore, okay, and it's beginning to grow. But the incomes of the people still are not very good. People that I know in Ireland are not feeling very well off. Their incomes, say university professors' incomes, are still very much lower than they were in 2008. So this is not a success. It's just less of a disaster than in Greece.
It was before.
than it was before, and than in some of the other countries. But as I look around, another example where some people say austerity has worked is UK. Mm-hmm. I look at the UK, and your incomes today are much lower than they were before the crisis.
Who is a successful economy now? Because the real wages, even in the United States, are below real wages, are below the levels that were back in 1980s.
That's right. So I don't view the United States as a success.
Is it a rational economic policy to sell or to privatize the natural monopoly, such as, for example, energy sector companies? Small countries in Croatia that has general government debt over 90% and usually cost of financing that debt is around 4% of GDP. Would that privatization or sell of a natural monopoly endanger financial sovereignty and management of the small countries?
Well, that's a very difficult question. From a narrow economic point of view, there are political dimensions to it. As we look across countries, what we've seen is that in some cases where you have badly managed state-owned enterprises, privatization has helped. But there are many other countries where you have well-managed state-owned enterprises and privatization has hurt. So I take a very pragmatic view on it, that ideologically there is no good argument for privatization.
Mr. Stiglitz, thank you for your precious time. Poštovani gledatelji, imali ste prilike čuti promišljanja jednog od najvećih svjetskih autoriteta s područja makroekonomije, teorije rasta i javnih financija, dakle onoga što je vezano uz preraspodjelu svjetskog bogatstva. Svojoj kolekciji od 40 počasnih doktorata širom svijeta danas je pridodao još jedan ovog sveučilišta u Splitu. Bili ushićeni ili razočarani onim što ste čuli, ovo je trenutno najbolje što vam svjetska ekonomska misao u ovom trenutku može dati. Poštovani gledatelji, hvala na pažnji i doviđenja.